Welcome to the First Gnostic Church of Christ. This is video 6 in the series for the read and commentary of the Gospel Truth. This should be the final video in the series. Now, in our last video, we talked about what one does once they receive Gnosis. What does one do with that knowledge? Of course, as we learned at that point, one takes upon the path of Christ, which Christ outlined very clearly during his walk here on earth, which includes loving your neighbor, not judging others, giving to the poor, helping the sick, and being a source of hope that there is good in the universe, and that light shines forth. You don't hide yourself. No one lights a candle to hide it, as Christ would always say, but rather you light a candle so that your light may light the room up for not just yourself, but everyone in the room. But ultimately, we understand from our last video, eventually our goal is to detach from the urges or attachments of this realm, also known as the material world, ruled by the god of this world, the false god known as the demiurge. Our goal is to go back to our original home, known as the pleroma. We've all fallen into a stupor, into the darkness, due to the deception set forth by the demiurge and his minions and the rulers of this world to make us forget what is our original state of perfection, our original state as sons and daughters of God, and our original home, the pleroma, the place of perfection, where there is no death, there is no suffering. So in order to achieve that, one may have to go through several lifetimes of reincarnation in order to take the fullness of their experience of this realm. It was humans that purposely came here. Each one of us willed ourselves to come to this realm. It was not the Father. It was not partaking of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And we'll talk about the Garden of Eden in later videos as we go through each one of these Gnostic texts to understand the humankind did not experience a fall in the Garden of Eden 6,000 years ago. We'll talk about why the nation of Israel is very significant, and we'll talk about the creation God as it pertains to the nation of Israel, as we know today is the modern day Jewish. And we'll also talk about how Jewish are made up of a diversity of people which have populated the world. And there are facts among the Jewish people, among any group, that are working for the demiurge knowingly, and then there are those that are also in the dark as well. But every human, whether Jew or Gentile, can find salvation when they take on Gnosis of their original origin and home. Now, I wanted to point out, in Gnosticism, we certainly use the word sin, as we saw on many occasions reading through the Gospel Truth. And you're going to see this in many other books of Gnosticism. And you'll also see this in the canonical texts as we read through some of the Gospel and some of the Old Testament books. What you always want to remember is that each one of these are written in the minds of those who lived at the time and their understanding. They did the best they could to interpret the message given to them by God or by Christ or whoever they believed was the prophetic source at the time. And from their lens, they lived in a world of sin and law, especially in Israel at the time. This is a very common theme through most of cultures and religions. It tends to be in a very primal beginning part of a culture that is still infantile or immature in its development, the necessity to feel they have to set forth rules and regulations, and that anyone who breaks those rules, regulations, or laws is doing some type of infraction or sin, if you call it that. But we're going to talk about the origin of sin later on. The word sin even means something in and of itself. It really derives from the word error, or to make a mistake. And that mistake in Orthodox Christianity pertains to the flawed nature of humanity. Just a state of mankind being imperfect by its very nature, intrinsically flawed. That's Orthodox Christian understanding of mankind's state of affair, state of being, and that Christ died on the cross in order to use his blood, much in the way that Abraham sacrificed lambs, or nation of Israel, the Hebrews sacrificed lambs to appease an angry God. So too Christ sacrificed himself in order that the sins may be cleansed And you see quite a bit of that going on in the book of Leviticus, where time and time again God of the Old Testament, Jehovah, required innocent, quote unquote, innocent or virginal calf or animals that were clean and untouched, if you will, as a form of sacrifice. And even in the Old Testament talks about the Old Testament God finding the aroma pleasurable. The smell of flesh burning was pleasing. And we'll talk about all of that, and hopefully you'll continue on this journey with me, and we'll get an understanding of why that is and what does that mean and how that's significant. Now, in Gnosticism, we don't think of sin in the same way that Orthodox Christians think of sin. Orthodox Christians, again, believe that sin is just in our nature, and there's nothing you can do about it. We are flawed human beings. We have to do the best we can to follow the dictates and the laws set forth for us, and most likely we'll fail miserably, but through prayer and meditation and going to church and praying to God and resisting temptation, perhaps we'll achieve some degree of sinlessness. But ultimately, it's Christ that's required as a sacrificial lamb in order to cleanse us of our sins, not necessarily cleanse us of our imperfection or our state of being, which again is flawed. Now, in Gnosticism, we do not see humankind as flawed. We believe each human being is a child and daughter of God, and in so being a child and daughter of God is perfect. Now, that does not therefore translate to mean that everything that we do is perfect. What it means is that in Gnosticism, we see sin the result of ignorance. That ignorance stems from not understanding our nature and our state of being. And in that, not knowing that we have a purpose and that we are perfect, that anything that we're doing that leads to error or, again, sin or making a mistake ultimately results in suffering. And that in and of itself is lesson enough to show us the error of our ways. And there's no need for a God figure to set forth a set of laws or to punish us in some way. It's merely a consequence that suffering results from separation from the source or light or life. So everything that's contrary to God, the perfect Father, the true Father in heaven, and the light and the source as it was created from the beginning or intended, is suffering and ultimately leads to death. And the wages of sin are death. So it's the lack of knowledge ultimately that leads to the consequence of error or sin, not the state of humans of being imperfect beings, but merely humans being ignorant or not having gnosis or knowledge. Now, we can see this demonstrated within life itself. Anytime you make a mistake that you later mature and look back and reflect on and regret, you will know that it's a consequence of some ignorance that you held or something you didn't know or you were too immature to fully understand. And only later were you able to outgrow that through your maturity, and your experiences brought knowledge to you and allowed you the understanding and the wisdom to not make the same mistake again. Now, that's, of course, a very simplistic way of saying that, but ultimately, knowledge itself is not enough in order to prevent us from making mistakes or sins or error. Knowledge is merely a means in which you have a piece of understanding. How you apply that, much like a salad. We may have knowledge about many things, but lack some knowledge in some areas. So we may not still fully comprehend or grasp what it is we're dealing with that's before us. So you can have great knowledge about certain things and still lack some essential aspect of the fullness of what you're trying to achieve and still fail at achieving that. So this is ultimately what Gnosticism does, or Gnosis does. It helps you to understand the root cause of all suffering is a result of how you see yourself as a human being within the context of existence and the universe and God, and what is your purpose and your meaning. That's all psychological, and it's also very spiritual, of course. That's the essence of everything. Seek you first the things of the Spirit, and everything else will follow, and that's absolutely true. So that's where we arrive, to understand that it is important that everything you do is an experience of gaining wisdom. Because with error is the wages of suffering, ultimately, and death, and you don't want that. Now, how do we go back to a state of perfection is when we realize that this realm and its attachments is what's imperfect, not the human state. Humankind is not imperfect. It's our attachment to the imperfect that poisons us or toxifies us. It's much like if you've ever been in a toxic relationship. Perhaps you mean well in the relationship, and you're very loving and you're very giving and to your partner, but your partner is not doing the same with you. They're abusive, emotionally, physically. It's not necessarily that you are a bad person, but your choice is a bad choice to remain in a relationship with that individual. That's what's toxic, the relationship. So it is too, that analogy, in this realm. As long as we continue to want to be here, we'll continue to have attachments to toxic aspects, because this realm is a realm that requires murder and death and suffering in order to have any type of equilibrium. It's a trade-off, if you will. There's nothing free in this universe. There's a cost, and the cost sum is ultimately equals zero, nothing, because it's about balancing. I give you 5, but I need 5 back, and so you end up not really having anything. You have the illusion that you're having some kind of gain from that, but ultimately you die and you don't take anything with you. Now, that does not mean, therefore, that you don't ultimately gain something. Yes, you do. You gain wisdom, hopefully. That's what you gain. But you don't gain anything from that is going to provide you a permanence in this realm. What you gain is a wisdom that ultimately will help you to transcend and ascend beyond this realm, that can then be utilized in the perfect realm, the place of the pleroma. So that's what we want to achieve. Now, I know a lot of what I'm saying is very complex because it's very new to many people that have been taught within the Orthodox construct, or the Islamic construct, or the Muslim construct, or the even Eastern concept of strict family and social pressure and expectations and taboo. Don't break this taboo. For example, the Hindu, you have to marry who we say you marry, or the Buddhist and their family, and it matters what you do within the context of the family, because the aunt or the uncle may say something if you don't follow exactly what's expected of you. See, this all stems from the demiurge's need to control humankind. And the demiurge and his minions does this by creating this world of expectations and laws and rules and regulations. And it's only going to be a matter of time before something breaks, because these rules and these regulations don't ultimately help us to arrive at a state of freedom and healing. They're merely there to give you the illusion that they're doing something for you, when in fact they're merely reinforcing the idea that you need laws in the first place, which interprets to mean there's something flawed about you or wrong about you that requires us to have to control you. Ultimately, that's what that boils down to. Now, I know that's quite an introduction, but I wanted to clarify that because I felt that's very important, as you have heard me say in the past 5 videos that we don't believe in sin in the conventional sense of the word sin. But I wanted to make it clear that that doesn't therefore mean that everything you do does not matter. It does matter. And hopefully that becomes more and more clear as we go along in reading other Gnostic texts and through other videos. Now let's go ahead and delve into the remaining part of this book, and I'll start off where I left off from the last video, and this heading is called "The Father is the Beginning and End." It reads here, "Paradise is the perfection in the thought of the Father, and the plants are the words of his reflection." So that's the key. If you want to return back to paradise or the pleroma, You must first correct your understanding of the Father from the false father and the way the false father has misled you and deceived you into understanding the context of humans within the universe versus the way Christ came to teach us our orientation to the God in heaven, which is that you are perfect the way you are. Now, again, that does not mean that you can't have ignorance and you can't make mistakes and have error. But ultimately, you are from God, and so being from God and an emanation of God, you are a son and daughter of God, and therefore perfect in your ultimate intention. And the plants are the words of His reflection. So, what does that mean? Think about where plants come from. They come from seeds. So this is ultimately talking about that is what matters. What we say, what our behaviors are, stem from our motivations, our intentions. And that's ultimately where the plants come from, of course, is the seed. And that is going to reflect the nature of the Father, which is, as we go along, it says, each one of His words is the work of His will alone in the revelation of His word. Since they were in the depth of His mind, and the Word, who was first to come forth, caused them to appear, along with an intellect that speaks the unique word by means of a silent grace. In other words, there is no need for God to boast. Oh, I sent my Son because I love you and to die for your sins so that I can give you grace. Now, this is a silent grace, meaning silence is eternal because it fills no space. So it's the place of eternal grace that's always been from the beginning, is now, and always will be. And this is why meditation is prayer is of benefit, because it puts you into a space of emptiness. And that is that place where grace resides, because that's the place of eternity. It goes on to say, it was called thought, since they were in it before becoming manifest. What is basically setting up here for you is that when God sets forth an intention, it's a perfect intention. And being that it's perfect, it cannot result in a flawed outcome. Its end result will be as intended. That's what it's saying here. It was called thought, since they were in it before becoming manifest. It happened then that the Word was the first to come forth at the moment pleasing to the will of Him who desired it, and it is in the will that the Father is at rest, and with which He is pleased. Listen to that. Feel the anointment and the healing from this understanding of the Father in heaven. The Father in heaven is at peace, has no anger, has no jealousy, has no harsh words to say to you, but is like a loving father that, as in the past video, gave the analogy of a young child that's learning to ride a bike and falls over and scrapes its knee. It's there to bring its love and bring its wisdom and to provide ointment to heal the scratch on the knee and help the child back up to help it on its bike again, to teach it through its lessons. Now, nothing happens without Him, nor does anything occur without the will of the Father. But His will is incomprehensible. His will is His footstep, but no one can know it, nor is it possible for them to concentrate on it in order to possess it. But that which He wishes takes place at the moment He wishes it. Even if the view does not please people before God, it is the Father's will. So again, this just keeps going back to the idea that the Father is unperturbed by the comings and goings of humankind. Rather, the humankind decided to commit adultery or have warfare and drop bombs on millions of people. Those don't flinch God. God is not troubled by those because God has great confidence in God's capacity to set in motion whatever God wishes and wills to be set forth, because God is endlessly compassionate and knows that everything ultimately will be brought to Gnosis and wisdom, and we will ascend these early stages of brutal and primitive behavior as a species. Now, again, I know some people may hear this and say, how can you say such a horrible thing that, something like Hiroshima, for example, killing hundreds and thousands of people? that God doesn't care about that. Now, God does, of course, have compassion, as it constantly says in Scripture that God has compassion for humankind, and continually says, woe to humankind for the suffering that they have to endure. Obviously, God also provides God's grace to humankind. So there is love there, a very deep love, profound love. But that doesn't mean that God is angry and taking tabs and score, because each one of us is responsible for everything that happens within society. And we all collectively must come together and take responsibility for that. And also, as I said earlier, everything that you do in this realm is going to have its karma, is going to have its outcome. When someone comes and drops a bomb on another nation and kills millions of people, that means that nation is filled with people that have to come back to this realm. They have to come back into the suffering because they have yet to learn the lessons that help them, not bring them to that place, that dark and horrific place. For the Father knows the beginning of them all as well as their end. For when their end arrives, he will greet them. Now I'm going to repeat that. For when their end arrives, he will greet them. Now notice how different that is from the Orthodox version of God. The Orthodox version of God is one where when you die, you have to be afraid of God, and you're going to go before God, and you have this sort of image of God behind a judge's huge desk, and it's dark all around, the angels and everybody's there, and maybe Christ is there, maybe as your representative, maybe not as your representative. And God opens this big book, and it makes a big sound on the stand, and dust like flies up, and God sees it, takes his long finger to see all the things you've done, and decides whether you're going to hell or heaven. Versus this version of God that says that God is there at the end to greet you. The end, you see, is the recognition of him who is hidden, that is, the Father, from whom the beginning came forth, and to whom will return all who have come from him, for they were made manifest for the glory and the joy of his name. So, in other words, it was hidden by the demiurge and the demiurge's minions, and all of those that follow the demiurge, that are going out of their way, bending over backwards to keep you in the dark and keep you distracted and keep you attached and plugged in to the matrix, if you will, so that you never wake up to the real world that's out there. Now, as great as the Matrix is, there's one part of the movie, The Matrix, that was incorrect, and that is that the architect is not there to keep you in a world so that you can continually be in a state of euphoria. The God of this realm is here to keep you in a state of fear and terror and horror. At the very existence, the very idea that you're living and that you know you're going to die and that you're going to look in the mirror and see your teeth fall out and your hair turn gray, and that you know you have chicken, but you're going to turn your head away when someone cuts the chicken's head off and blood spurts everywhere and the chicken just flails around in pain and suffering. That's the world of terror and fear. The other part that is a perfect analogy to the movie Matrix is that in the movie Matrix, the real world was a very ghastly, apocalyptic world. In Gnosticism, the real world outside of this kanoma is the pleroma. It's a world of perfection. It will make this world look pale in comparison. It is a world of wonder and beauty and no suffering and death. It requires nothing. It's completely free. Everything has been given to you by the Father with no need of cost or compensation. The cost of this realm is death, ultimately. Next section. The Son is the name and revelation of the Father. So that is the very purpose of Christ. Christ came here to reveal, to remind you, to wake you back up to the true Father, so that you can understand that you've been sold lies, and you have been convinced that you're wretched, it's horrible, and that somehow it's not psychotic and sick that you want to go to heaven forever and ever and live in happiness and bliss, while your sisters and brothers who may not believe exactly the way you do suffers eternal damnation suffering, and that's somehow not psychotic. So it says here, the name of the Father is the Son. That is the holy name of the Father. It's the Son. It is He who, in the beginning, gave a name to him who came from him, while he remained the same, and he conceived him as a son. Now here's the trickery the demiurge has pulled on humankind. It has made you believe in Orthodox Christianity that the name of God is Jehovah, and that Christ is Jehovah. They've done that purposely to mislead you. The name of the true Father is not Jehovah. The name of the true Father is Christ. And we're going to talk about this. What does the word Christ mean? But let's just say that very quickly. The word Christ is the essence of emanation. It is the essence of what humans know to be creation, crystallization of God's will. It goes on to say, He gave him his name, which belonged to him. He, the Father, who possesses everything that exists around him. What does that mean exactly? It means that when Christ came to earth, God was revealed, and therefore all creation became again through the Son. He possesses the name. He has the Son. It is possible the Son to be seen. The name, however, is invisible, for it alone is the mystery of the invisible, about to come to ears completely filled with it through the Father's agency. In other words, you're not going to really understand the message of Christ until you have this Gnostic moment, this Gnosis and revelation. Moreover, as for the Father, his name is not pronounced, but is revealed through a Son. Thus then, the name is great. And again, remember I said that eternal grace and infinity reside within emptiness, exquisite emptiness, exquisite silence, because it is devoid of anything of this realm. So it is empty of any error or misunderstanding or ignorance. It's that emptiness that is the essence of God. It's almost as though if you could take this current realm and take your hands and separate a piece of emptiness or a vacuum from this realm, therein would exist the essence of emptiness, because it's a place that this realm doesn't exist. That's perfection. So that's why when it talks about the Father's name's not pronounced, it's essentially telling you it cannot be pronounced in this realm. It cannot exist in this realm. So that's why the God comes to be manifest through the Son, who embodies in silence the name of the Great One, the true Father. Who then has been able to pronounce a name for him, this great name, except him alone to whom the name belongs, and the children of the name, in whom the name of the Father is at rest, and who themselves in turn are at rest in his name, since the Father has no beginning. This is really telling us that this name has always been, and has always been within each of us, and we haven't had no beginning, and we have no ending, because we are emanation, we are the essence of God, the true Father. It is He alone who conceived it for Himself as a name, in other words, His creation. In the beginning, before He had created the eternal beings, that the name of the Father should be supreme over them. That is the true name, which is secure by His authority and by His perfect power. For the name is not drawn from lexicons, nor is His name derived from common name-giving. It is invisible. That's the mystery. It means that there's nothing in this realm that can pronounce the name of the Father, because that name is a holy name, meaning it's full. It is complete. It encompasses everything. And it cannot be in this realm, because this is the realm of imperfection. It holds a holy place. And so it can only be manifest through the actions of the Son. And the closest we can come to it is the word Christ. The Father alone gave the Son a name, because He alone saw Him, because He alone was capable of giving Him a name. For he who does not exist has no name. For what a name would one give Him who did not exist? Nevertheless, He who exists also with His name, and He alone knows it, and to Him alone the Father gave a name. So, in this realm, people do not see that Christ exists, but Christ came embodied as the Father, and therefore became as the Christ. That became its name. He did not therefore keep it secretly hidden, but it came into existence, and the Son himself disclosed the name. The name, then, is that of the Father, just as the name of the Father is the beloved Son. For otherwise, where would he find a name except from the Father? But someone will probably say to a friend, quote, "Who would give a name to someone who existed before himself?" As if, indeed, children did not receive their name from one of those who gave them birth. Unquote. What does that mean? It means that each one of us already have within us a name. And I talked about this in the other videos, that you're coming to this realm, descended to this realm, to find yourself, because in your ignorance you lost yourself. And by finding yourself, you find your name, and you take back that name to the pleroma, and then you exist and you become. So it is with Christ. He came here to this realm so that he may exist for us. This is what it's talking about. But Christ had always been in the heart of the Father from the beginning. All this intended from the beginning is what this essentially is telling us. So that Christ existed before God was manifested. In other words, we've forgotten God, and Christ came back first to show us God again. So God followed after Christ, even though God came before Christ, is what it's saying here. Above all, then, it is fitting for us to think this point over. What is the name? This is the true name, the name that came from the Father, for it is He who owns the name. He did not, you see, get the name on loan, as in the case of others who receive names that are made up. This is the proper name. There is no one else to whom He has given it. It remained unnamed, unuttered, till the moment when He who is perfect pronounced it in Himself, and it was He alone who was able to pronounce His name and to see it. When it pleased the Father, then, that His Son should be His pronounced name, and when He who has come from the depth disclosed His name, He divulged what was hidden, because He knew that the Father was absolute goodness. For this reason, indeed, the Father brought this particular one forth, that He might speak concerning the realm and His place of rest from which He had come forth, and that He might glorify the fullness, the greatness of His name, and the sweetness of the Father. Now this seems redundant. Why does it keep talking about the name? Why is the name so important? Why is the unnamed name so important? It's saying God doesn't have a name, but yet it's saying that through Christ God has a name. Why is this all so significant? Why does it keep wanting to make this so abundantly clear to the reader? It's important in that you are not your name. In this realm, your name is significant. You know, you may be Susie, you may be Tony, you may be whoever you might be called by your parents. But in the pleroma, your name is the essence of everything that you are. Your name has not been given to you. You give yourself a name by your behavior, by your actions, by your choices, by what you will. You can be whatever you want, in other words. So when Christ came, Christ wanted to represent the Father in the Father's name, in the essence of the Father. And the only way in which the Father was able to respect that was if it was represented in a very pure form. And Christ was the first to recognize the absolute goodness of the true Father in heaven, and by so doing became the first begotten Son, and the first to take on the essence of the Father, which is the Father in name. That's the understanding here. That's Gnosis. A Gnostic moment for you is to realize your name is the essence of who you are. It's not your pen name or your legal name. Those are merely a type of identification that we use in this realm. But in the pleroma, we don't have names. We are just the essence of what we embody and what we project and what we are known to each other merely by the choices that we make and the actions that we take. That is the essence, and that we understand each other on that spiritual level, not on a fragmented unit level where it's you're Susan, you're Joe, you're John, but we all are embodied as a unity, the emanation and essence of the true Father or God. We are all part of that, but we're different characteristics of that Father, much in the way that your body, and it talks about this in the canonical texts where the body is made up of many parts, so too the Father is made up of many parts in the pleroma. We are each a part of that Father, but that one person that may have many parts still has only one name. So this is all talking about unity here. The next section, the place of the blessed. Each one will speak concerning the place from which they have come forth, and to the region from which they received their essential being. They will hasten to return once again and receive from that place, the place where they stood before, and they will taste of that place, be nourished and grow, and their own place of rest is their fullness. This is talking about the pleroma. Now, it doesn't say it here, but it's introducing to you that place of the blessed. It starts to imply the pleroma, and then it starts to bring forth other ideas and concepts like the emanations. All the emanations from the Father, therefore, are fullnesses, and all his emanations have their roots in the one who caused them all to grow from himself. He assigned their destinies. Now that's the thing, is when you have Gnosis, at that moment, you know that you will take on the name of the Father. Now, you will be at the beginning stages of emanating the essence of the Father. And you will also know that you are a child of the Father, that you have come here, and that ultimately you'll never be able to turn back from that, because you always understand that now you see this realm is an illusion, and it's a realm of suffering and continually sacrificing in order to have life, death to have life. Goes on to say, they then became manifest individually that they might be perfected in their own thought, for that place to which they extend their thoughts is their root, which lifts them upward through all heights to the Father. And it's going back to the seed, and going back to the idea that we all came down to the dirt, into the deepest parts of the ground, like a seed, so that we may germinate and take root and then grow up into the sky. And this analogy, this symbolism is suggestive that we're all coming here to ferment our seeds and to blossom forth the essence of who we are. Each one of us are different types of flowers, for example. And we all come here in order that we may manifest and bring out the essence of our seed that was intended from the beginning. They reach his head, which is rest for them, and they remain there near to it as though to say that they have touched his face by means of embraces. But they do not make this plain, for neither have they exalted themselves, nor have they diminished the glory of the Father, nor have they thought of him as small, nor bitter, nor angry, but as absolutely good, unperturbed, sweet, knowing all the spaces before they came into existence, and having no need of instruction. Because we are the essence of the Father, we have no need of instruction or set of rules or laws or regulations. And no, there's not this judgment whereby God is angry and bitter, but rather God is absolutely good, filled with absolute light and love, and there's no darkness within God. So we only need to realize this, and by so realizing this as the essence of our truth, and we come to accept that, we really embrace the message of Christ, and that's when we truly accept Christ. And by accepting Christ, we take on the name of the Father. We start becoming and walking toward our Christship. Such are they who possess from above something of this immeasurable greatness, as they strain toward that unique and perfect one who exists there for them. And they do not go down to Hades. They have neither envy nor mourning, nor is death in them, but they rest in him who rests, without wearying themselves or becoming confused about truth. That Gnostic moment of realizing, as Christ always talked about, the true Father. I tell you the truth. What I am telling you is the truth. That's the essence of the Gnostic moment. But they indeed are the truth, and the Father is in them, and they are in the Father, since they are perfect, inseparable from him who is truly good. They lack nothing in any way, but they are given rest and are refreshed by the Spirit, and they listen to their root. They are busy with concerns in which one will find his root, and one will suffer no loss to his soul. So that's when you realize that everything you're doing here is about getting back to the pleroma, and your eye is set on the path back. And the way in which you can achieve that is through the path of Christ that brought to us the way in which you can follow Christship. And there's no need for you to have a sense of urgency about this. Once you have the Gnostic moment, you will invariably find your way back to the pleroma. And some of us will do it in 1 or 2 lifetimes, some of us in 20, some of us in 200 lifetimes. But this is not a race, and there's no competition, and there's no comparison in the eyes of God. Because everyone must find their complete selves. And you're not going to be able to fool yourself and think that, oh, I've arrived now, when in fact you have many more lessons that you must experience in order to gather all the pieces of yourself to find the fullness of your name through the Father. And so that time is all about becoming empty in a process that is natural to you. Such is the place of the blessed, this is their place. As for the others, then may they know in their place that it does not suit me, after having been in the place of rest, to say anything more. Now, that's talking about not judging others. What about the others? It doesn't concern us, because we all have our walk. It doesn't suit us to concern ourselves with what other people are doing. The other thing I wanted to bring forth is this concept of heaven coming to earth. May thy will be done as in heaven to earth. There is a transformation that is occurring. Now, within Gnosticism, it's not clear whether or not, there may be different opinions on this, whether or not each one of us completely leave this and go to the pleroma, and they're separate things. Or in fact, it is the light within the kanoma that is the pleroma, and that it transforms and heals, eventually evaporating it from within. Now, sometimes I do lean toward the latter. Essentially, what I'm getting at is many people will say, well, does it really matter about what we do here then as a collective, as a society? Of course it does, perhaps. In this latter form of the understanding of the pleroma, it could be that we are slowly transforming this realm to heal it from within outward. And so in that sense, yes. But even if that were not the case, and these were separate experiences, even in that instance, our path is found here, back to the pleroma. And so it is that what you do here will matter individually and collectively. Let's continue. It is there I shall dwell in order to devote myself at all times to the Father of all and the true friends, those upon whom the love of the Father is lavished, in whose midst nothing of him is lacking. It is they who manifest themselves truly, since they are in that true and eternal life and speak of the perfect light filled with the seed of the Father, which is in his heart and in the fullness, while his Spirit rejoices in it and glorifies him in whom it was, because the Father is good, and his children are perfect and worthy of his name, because he is the Father. Children of his kind are those whom he loves. This is what you must understand, that the only way that you're ever going to arrive at a state whereby you can return to the Father is by first believing you are worthy of returning back to the Father. If you live in a place of the thought of sin and that you're not worthy and you're a wretch, and you see the death of Christ on a cross, you're constantly reminded that Jesus was defeated at the cross because God's an angry God and judgmental, you will never feel worthy. And any worthiness that you might have is through the idea of suffering. And if Christ can't even overcome suffering, how could you possibly overcome suffering? So this is the result of the grand master of illusions, deception, the demiurge. They have inverted every truth that Christ came to teach, and they've taught you every lie. They've nailed on the cross the truth, but they've inverted it in a way to make you believe that you have nothing to do with it. They've made it so foreign and distant from you that you can't do anything. You will find yourself continually failing because you will see that you don't have grand knowledge. And everything you do as you go through life, you'll make constant mistakes. One mistake after another. You'll hurt someone, you'll do this, you'll do that. And you'll constantly feel guilty and shameful. And you'll feel pitiful. And you will be so certain that you're loving God and that you love Christ. And Christ is so beautiful. And you're having such a wonderfully holy experience because you know that you are redeemed through Christ that loves you so much and has provided so much grace in redeeming your sorry self, you see, as you continually remind yourself of how sorry of a self you are. And so you can never arrive at a place of worthiness. And the oxymoron in all of this is that somehow, despite your sorriness and your unworthiness, you still were found worthy by the death of Christ. You see, that should tell you already there's something wrong with that. That's inconsistent message. In Gnosticism, we say that you already are perfect, and you need to understand that because you come from a perfect Father, perfect God. You emanated from God, a perfect intention. And the Father is not going to find error in the will. God is not going to have any error in God's intention. And by even implying that there would be error is to imply that God's not perfect, you see. Everything is here purposely, and so it's set into motion. But the beauty of all of this is that the only way in which you can be perfect is that you have to first be free. And in order for you to be free, you have to know the truth. The truth is you're free. And the truth is that the truth will set you free. And that's the irony, is that not only is the truth going to set you free, but the fact that you're free is because of truth. So there's no judgment, there's no law, there's nothing like that. It's all set into motion so you can find yourself and find your name through the Father, through the Christ. We are all Christ, and that's ultimately what you must find. You are an aspect or attribute that's unique to Christ, the Christship, to the church that Christ marries. And you're the bride, and you're perfect. And Christ picks the perfect bride and marries it into the family of God, you see. This is what this is all about. So we welcome you, no matter where you are in your life, no matter what mistakes you've made, and even those are not ultimately mistakes. They're there to help you grow, to reveal truths to you. You'll come in your time. We accept you as you are. And later on, we will talk about in other videos about, I know some will say, well, are you saying that people that murder people or do horrible things shouldn't get punished? And how should we think of these people? And how should we treat them? Should we not bash them or make them feel bad and ashamed and horrible? These are great questions. And hopefully, as we read more Gnostic texts, it'll become more and more clear to you. What do we do in these instances? How do we treat each other? And what will result in the ways that we choose to treat each other? And hopefully it becomes more clear to you how we see that within Gnosticism and how we treat that within Gnosticism. And hopefully you'll come to see that the way that we choose to treat that makes all the difference in the world, not only in the way that we're treating it, but in the way that it will affect what's being treated. All right, with that, thank you for listening. And the next book will pick up in the next video. So we'll continue the series from the Gnostic texts. So thank you for listening and joining and subscribing, and talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.